Ni hao, good afternoon. All right, so I'm a journalist, as most of you know, and the question that's going to guide us today is, should we move from national journalism to transnational journalism? This is the question that brought me to China to live here in the first place, and it's a question that's much more important for all of you than what you maybe realize. Now, if you've been around journalists recently, there's been a lot of nervousness. We feel that we are in a moment of crisis and that our livelihood is at a crossroads. It can go very badly from here, but as you see in the cartoons, the one in the top left is what most of us are thinking right now, and the one in the top right is the way most of us are living. We are facing a moment in which new media is offering journalism for free. Think about the last time you actually paid to read an article, or the last time you actually had to take money out to buy a newspaper or a magazine. Everything now is basically free. And all of the papers, or most of the papers you see in the lower box, you can just easily click and follow online. So a lot of the crisis, or a big part of this crisis of journalism, has been blamed on that, on the way people can access information for free. But for now, I want to talk to you about something else. It's not only that, it's also a mindset. And journalism, as we know it, was born in the 19th century. Most of the newspapers, like The Guardian, the New York Times, the Times, all of these were creations of a moment when nation states were being built. What is a nation state? A nation state is the Republic of France. A nation state is Colombia. A nation state is a country that has a constitution and citizens that identify with the area within its borders. And it can either have a monarchy or not, that does not matter, but it is a very specific kind of institution born in the 19th century with defined borders. And journalism comes from there, because journalism or newspapers, they try to answer questions that are important for citizens of a specific country. So what happens to newspapers? You usually have, when you open it, the first pages are national politics, right? Then maybe you jump to national economy, and maybe you jump to sports, mostly national sports. And you have a little section that's international journalism. And most of those pieces are made by correspondents. This newspaper has, on other nation states around the world. And that kind of system worked very well for most of the 20th century. Very well. Now, the world has changed quite a bit. I don't know if you're familiar with chaos theory, but this slide right here, this shows that saying from chaos theory in which a butterfly in Beijing can cause a hurricane at the other side of the world, here in Kansas. How many of you are familiar with that saying? Okay, quite a lot of you. So what is this about? Interconnectivity. The world in which we live in today is even more connected. And with the entrance of China into the global stage, which I believe is the most important event of the 21st century, this interconnectivity has been even more intense. And journalism is a huge part of it, because us as journalists, our job is to ask questions and try to give a sense to what is going on. So if we see what is going on from a purely national perspective, we might lose sense of what all of this interconnectivity is all about. So let me tell you a little story about an investigation I was involved in recently that is, I think, the perfect example to visualize this. You're aware of the Panama Canal, right? Connects two halves of the world. Before the Panama Canal, people had to go all around Africa from Europe to get to Asia, and going around by ship could take maybe 9 months, right? Or if they wanted to go from Washington to San Francisco, they had to go all the way down to the Magellan Strait. So the Panama Canal in 1902 basically solved that, right? And in Nicaragua, they've always had the dream of building a canal like the one in Panama. And about 10 years ago, a Chinese businessman goes to Nicaragua, and he talks to the president. And he says, well, Mr. President, we can build a canal in Nicaragua. He was the president, the head of a telecommunications company in China. And the president said, well, that's perfect. What do you need? And he said, well, we need to change the constitution. And we would like to have a company that doesn't have any supervision by anybody. The president of Nicaragua said, that's a great idea. Well, let's change the constitution. Let's allow for this company to work, do whatever job it needs to do, because, well, who wants laws to interfere with it, right? And so, go right through. And the project started. But people were slightly nervous, and they didn't really know who this man was. He seemed a little bit mysterious. The company that he created in order to do the project didn't exist before this project. It was created just for that. This man had never built a canal in his life, not even a port, right? It was a telecommunications company. So people in Nicaragua started to ask questions. But a lot of these questions were very difficult to answer from Nicaragua. And I arrived in Beijing roughly around that time, and I spoke with Nicaraguan journalists, and we said, well, listen, I have a lot of contact because I'm the Colombian correspondent, but I'm also in touch with other Latin American news outlets. So we said, listen, we need to answer this question, and it clearly cannot be answered from Nicaragua. I am in Beijing. I know a journalist that can tap into the stock exchange in Hong Kong and get information from there. Let's do a network. And we worked in this story, a team of journalists in Nicaragua going into the communities where the canal was going to go through, looking at the environmental impact, the impact into communities. In Beijing, I looked into the background of the company that was going to build the canal, and coordinated with Hong Kong somebody that would look into the files, the stock exchange information of the company. And we found a group of 15 different companies. I'm only going to show you a little piece of this investigation because I don't have enough time to go into the details. But 7 of them were in tax havens in the Cayman Islands. 5 of them were in tax havens around Europe, and the other ones were either in Hong Kong, Nicaragua, or Beijing. And they were just connected to each other, and all of them had the same name. And we said, okay, this is weird. So I talked to a lawyer and asked, well, why would they need 15 different companies tied to each other, owning in different countries, each owning the other? He said, well, that's an easy way to eschew any kind of legal suits. So if they're being sued by another company or by a government, it's very difficult to pinpoint the responsibility because they just go from one to the other company and said, okay, that's a good answer. Now, it was even more strange that most of these companies only had about $100,000 of total capital to build a canal that was expected to cost $50 billion. So throughout this investigation, there were a lot more questions than answers that started to emerge. But one thing that we were able to determine was, and from China, was that the Chinese government was not involved in this. It was a purely private enterprise, which was something that Nicaragua really wanted to answer, but they had no way of knowing. So what we were able to, or what I think this example tells us, and a lot of you are educators, is that we need to take from different fields, in this case from different countries, in order to build a big picture to answer a question. And we're at a school, and schools have been, the education system in schools have been in the vanguard of a change in thought, which is the competence system and the problem solving, the way students are going to solve problems, is being integrated into how you teach. And problem-based learning is kind of going beyond the specific subjects in schools and understanding that knowledge is transversal. So you have to go into the knowledge areas of each subject to solve a problem. Now, journalists need to learn from that a little bit more than what they do. And they need to go beyond the little boxes that define our trade, which is especially the national boxes. We need to learn how to solve journalistic problems transnationally. Why? Because the biggest issues we are facing right now are transnational issues. We're facing global warming, we're facing migration, we're facing terrorism, we're facing drug trade, arms trade, and these problems go beyond the national sphere. This is a normal newsroom. Every day, journalists, or every week if you're doing a magazine, journalists go around the table, and each one of these persons represents a different field, right? Politics, culture, sports, etc. So they sit around the table and they say, well, what are you going to write about today? What are you going to write about today? What are you going to? And they set up what the edition for that day is going to look like. That worked very well. And without meaning to end this kind of dynamic, we also need to learn to go into this kind of dynamic, which is much weaker still. We need people in different parts of the world, and we can have them now because we have instant communications, sitting around their tables in every country they're involved in, trying to solve a problem. Not trying to see what happened today in a specific country, because you have international correspondents in a lot of countries, but they send information about what happened in that country that day. What did the president of Brazil say when he was sent to prison? What did the president of China say in this speech? What did the president of that? But that is good and fine, but we need more problem solving. And the reason why we need more problem solving is that we, as citizens of the world, use information to take decisions, to make decisions. The classical economic theory states that in order to take a rational decision, you need information. If you do not have the right information, it's impossible for you to take a rational decision. And for better or worse, we get a lot of this information through journalism. If journalism is stuck in a way of thinking that comes from the 19th century, it will be difficult to answer some of these questions. And even if we live in societies with or no elections, we were still making a lot of choices. In markets, we make choices from which what to buy, what car, even what country to move to. There are endless number of decisions we make as citizens. And information is democracy, information is power, and information is that with which we pave our way forward in the world. Thank you. And well, I hope you can see more of this kind of journalism in the future.